Yeah. Okay, so it's Sunday, November 13th, about 11 a.m., and we're here with Jack Vincent, who is a Vietnam War veteran. Okay, so when and where were you born?
I was born in Santa Ana, California in November of 1942, actually November 17th.
What are your parents' names?
My father was deceased shortly after I was born, but my mom was Marjorie Foster. She remarried, and my father was John Foster.
Okay.
My father was Ronald, who passed away when I was 9 months old.
Where did you grow up at?
Laguna Beach, California.
And how would you describe your childhood, just shortly?
Well, I was too young to know my father, so I didn't recognize that he was gone, really. But so I lived with my mom, and my mom remarried when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and childhood was fairly normal, very active. I spent a lot of time on the beach. Spent a lot of time in the summer playing volleyball because we lived right overlooking the beach, and that was the big sport in California, still is. And I spent my time in public schools and through the 9th grade, and then I attended a military academy in Carlsbad, California. I think I had pretty much a normal youth. I was participating in most of the sports. I think it was kind of difficult, to be honest, if you look at the church side of things, because my mother was a daughter of an Episcopal minister, and so we went to the Episcopal church, and my stepfather was Catholic, and he went to the Catholic church, so every week our week started with my brothers and I going to the Episcopal church with my mother and my father off to the Catholic church. And why does that play a part? Later, when my daughter was thinking about getting married, she was engaged to a Catholic, and we had a discussion about which church. And so I was very encouraging for her to become a Catholic so they could start their week together at the same church.
Okay.
But otherwise, as I said, I went to the military academy. When I graduated from there, I went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and so that takes me up to the time before the service.
Okay. And then how about a little bit about your wife and kids now?
Okay. Jane and I met in Lincoln when I was teaching ROTC at the University of Nebraska, and we dated for less than a year, got married there, and since that time we've had 2 children. I have a son, David, who's 43 years old, and he lives in Fort Mill, South Carolina, which is in York County, interestingly enough. And my daughter, Carrie, lives in Kansas City. David has 2 of our grandchildren. He had a girl first, then a boy. And Carrie has 3 children. She's married to Michael Babbitt, who she met in Kansas City, and he went to Dana College. And they have 3 grandchildren. They have two girls and a boy.
Okay. Is there a military background in your family at all?
My uncle Hap was in World War II. And my brother was in the National Guard in California. My other uncle Norm was also in World War II, not in the combat zone. He was in the military during World War II, but not in the theater, the European theater. And that's it.
Okay. And did that influence you at all to join or anything?
No.
No? Okay.
Although I admired my uncle, Hap. He talked about his war stories. We spent a lot of time, and he was very close to my mom, and she missed him very much when he was gone. But I mean, it didn't influence my decision to go into the military.
Okay.
But it influenced my decision on how great I thought the military was.
Okay. Yep. Okay, what were you doing prior to the war starting or prior to your awareness of the war?
Okay. Well, I mentioned that I went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo and I was a business major. And unfortunately, I probably didn't take academics as seriously as I could have. I went to a military academy for 3 years. It was all boys. So my first year was spent chasing all girls and doing, I was there to play baseball for Cal Poly. And so I had a tough time at the beginning, but what I did, Emma, is I relied on the 3 years that I was in military academy and was able to get credit for the first year of ROTC at Cal Poly. So I hadn't really thought about it at that time, but my grades were down a little bit from screwing around. So then what I did is I went over and talked to the people in the ROTC department and asked if there might be a space in the program for me. They said yes. Got in there, really found my niche, and especially in my sophomore year of college, I got hurt. I had kind of what they call Tommy John right now, but I didn't have the surgery that went with it. And so I dropped out of that program and made ROTC my big thing. So I was commissioned as a second lieutenant and did the requisite training. Early in my career, I went to Germany, was there for 9 months, and my tour was curtailed to come back, interestingly enough, to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, to train people going to Vietnam, even though I had not been there.
Oh.
So that takes me up to the time before combat.
Okay, and so then were you a volunteer or drafted to Vietnam?
Well, actually, neither. Okay, what happened is, as a second lieutenant or as an officer in the Army, you're kind of at the mercy of the service. And so when I came back to Fort Lewis, Washington to train, I was kind of at the mercy of whatever happened. And so I wasn't drafted because I elected to go through the ROTC program. And I didn't volunteer for Vietnam because we just knew as an officer that our time was coming. It was just a matter of when. So I was just chosen to go there as an individual replacement.
Okay. So how old were you when that happened?
Ooh.
Or do you know what
Yeah,
year?
I went there in 1967, so I was 25.
Okay.
And one thing I mentioned earlier that may be of interest to whoever may listen to this in the future, a lot of people that went to Vietnam when they were first deployed went as units. So maybe, like I was in the 1st Air Cavalry Division, they deployed as an entire unit, as an entire division of 20,000 people, as did other units, okay? Then after the war had gone on for a while, then they needed people to replace those folks because the tour in Vietnam was 1 year. And that's unlike World War II. When they would go over to a unit, they'd stay till the war was over and then they came back as a unit. For us, it was just individual replacement, which I was.
Okay. Did like going to the war like disrupt your life at all, or not really, since you?
Well, I think as a career officer, you know that you're going to be disrupted, if you will, or your lifestyle will change on occasion. And that happened not only going to Vietnam, but anytime you're at a location. Just be like if your family is uprooted and all of a sudden you had to go to Indiana to run a Runza, there are disruptions there. But, it changes because you know that you're going to be going there for a year, hopefully, and that you won't be with your family, you won't be with your girlfriend, you won't be with your boyfriends, and those types of things. So from that standpoint, it's disruptive. But that never really entered my mind until you asked the question, because I volunteered to serve my country. I was doing that. It was a great cause, as well as I knew the cause, and so not too disruptive.
Okay. How did your family feel about it?
Well, my mother was very, very close to my brother, to her brother, Hap, that I mentioned earlier. And so she was really proud that I was a soldier and an officer, and So, but I'm sure that they were concerned. My grandmother was concerned. I never really saw the emotions for my stepbrother. My one brother had moved out of the house and we didn't keep real close contact, so um, I think not too much with them. I think my younger brother was concerned because we were about 6 or 7 years age difference between us, and so big brother's going off to war, and so from that standpoint, they were concerned.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit about like your training and stuff, but what did that exactly entail?
Those whom I trained or the training I received?
Your training you received.
Okay. Well, every person who's commissioned in the Army goes to a various school for his or her branch. For example, I was in the field artillery, so I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. People in the air defense artillery go to Fort Bliss, Texas. Those in the infantry would go for officers training to Fort Benning, Georgia. If you were an administrative person, you go to Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana. So I received that basic 8-week allocation of training, just trained me how to become an artillery officer. I was taught the leadership techniques and so on in ROTC. So this was just to polish the skills in the area that I was going to be in, which was a field artillery. So I received that training. Then when I went to Europe for my first tour, I was a fire direction officer in the artillery. And basically what that is, to put it in today's terms, we were the ones that computed the data to put on a gun to make sure that it was pointed in the right direction, that the elevation on the tube was correct to get the rounds to the right place. And so I did that for about 9 months. Coincidentally, I was also the Officers Club custodian, which would be like a manager of the country club for the officers within our unit. And so there I learned some training. We were on the east, we were right next to the East German border in West Germany. And so I learned the skills, I learned how to move our vehicles, how to tactically deploy them and so on. So I had that learning vehicle. And then when I was curtailed to come back to Fort Lewis, Washington, before I was sent to Vietnam, not knowing I was going to go to Vietnam, I was teaching people how to shoot on the rifle range, basic trainees and those going to Vietnam on how to shoot their rifles. And then the last 4 or 5 months before I was deployed that I was there, I had a close combat course, which was kind of a, well not kind of, it was a simulation of infantry troops advancing towards the enemy. One group would advance, the other would cover with fire, the next group, they would move up, they would cover with fire and so on. Taught them how to do that under simulated machine gun fire and rifle fire and explosives going off around them to make it pretty realistic. And for me, I was always teaching skills that I knew they had to have, but having not been to Vietnam, really didn't know what they would be experiencing, if that makes sense. Okay.
So once you were deployed, what was your thoughts as you were going over to Vietnam, or your attitude about it?
Well, fine. I knew that I was going over to replace, and when you're a career officer, and I learned this very early, it was very, very important for me to know that when I got there, I needed to be a commander if I could, and I needed to have this for my professional development, and more importantly, I needed to have this to feel like a proud American serving the country and providing the peace mission that we have here, or to allow for the freedoms for people that are here. When I arrived in Vietnam, I was scared. You didn't know what the situation was. There had been units that had been had conflict around them, and so you were always on your guard. But once we got there, we kind of got an idea of what the mission would be. But when I first got there, I didn't know which unit I was going to. I just knew that I was a first lieutenant at that time, going to Vietnam to replace somebody. And so then once we got there, we kind of got a situational development given to us by somebody in the intelligence field to kind of get an idea of what's happening around us. And we learned at that point in time, Emma, that the war was 360 degrees. Whereas in World War II or Korea, in Korea, there was South Korea, North Korea, the enemy was there to the north. You know, in Germany it was in this particular place, but in Vietnam, especially with what they call guerrillas, have you heard that term? You don't know where they would come from, where they would be. They could be part of the civilian populace. They could be rice workers during the day, an enemy at night. And then we knew that there was a very skilled enemy. We were told the North Vietnamese people would do anything, give up their lives, whatever they had to, for their country. So we got kind of that general picture, but I had no idea, number one, how hot it was going to be, how humid it was, and you know, and how much water we'd have to drink, and how many pills I'd have to take to conquer the chances of mosquitoes and the other pests that they had there, how guarded you had to be for small reptile snakes that were deadly, and those types of things. You just, you don't get a feel for it, but you become very conscious of it when you're there, and it's you, and they say tuck in your mosquito net and at night when you're sleeping and that type of thing. So, and then shortly after I was there, they told me which unit I was going to go to. And so then when I went there, it was at that point in time when I had an idea of one of two jobs that I might have when I got to the field, who my boss was going to be, and knowing full well that his experience would be able to give me what I needed to know to do that job.
Do you want to just like describe the term guerrilla for people listening if they don't know?
Um,
Or what that
well, I don't know that I really know.
Okay.
A guerrilla is somebody that you probably don't suspect,
Okay.
that may or may not be well armed, may have just an explosive with him or her or a tot. You just didn't know who that person would be. And so if a family knew that they may be able to get their rice for a month, or that they wouldn't be blown up and knocked out of their homes by the North Vietnamese or by other Viet Cong, if you will, they could be a guerrilla. Some of them were very, very well trained and skilled, and they became very good. They were very knowledgeable about the terrain, which was really very, very difficult, Emma, because the maps were terrible, and I mean, you couldn't GPS it and say, get on Interstate 80 and cruise up to your enemy. You know, I mean, it was jungle-like, trees everywhere, canopy coming over. You had very few features to guide in on. You couldn't say go out to the interstate and at the balloon, turn right, and then head towards
Yeah.
Aurora. You know, none of that stuff. So, but they were very talented soldiers. We had to always be very careful. The guys in the unit that I was in were always welcoming these young kids, cute little kids, come up there and want to shine your shoes, and you give them a little bit of money, but that same person could be back that night to blow you up.
Wow.
So the training levels then was based on their age, and they could be from very unknowledgeable, dangerous, to extremely knowledgeable and extremely dangerous, or anything in between. And you never know who it was.
Wow.
And mind you, you didn't see this around you all day. You just didn't know who it was every day. And every day was not, shooting back and forth and killing and so on. Most days were precautionary.
What was your understanding of why the U.S. was involved in the war?
Well, I think what we wanted to make sure is that communism didn't continue to spread through the Orient. And I know that, I can't recall exactly when Johnson deployed ground forces, but they sent military advisors in to take over from the French, who just more or less quit. And we did not learn a lot from that, but we wanted to make sure that communism didn't spread. So then they started with advisors to the South Vietnamese military, and they were much less skilled than the North Vietnamese. And then once they saw that they weren't making an impact, then they brought in the American troops. So my understanding is keep communism from just continuing to spread and then become a cancer that would take more and more and more and more.
So as the war progressed and more things were going down and stuff, how did you receive that information of what was happening and like what the president was saying and stuff like that?
Well, you asked a question in the information that you sent before, describe things in one word, and I came up with a couple. Actually, I came up with three, but I remember two of them right now. Number one, it was confusing, and number two was chaotic, and number three, catastrophic, I thought. Because a lot of times I think the intelligence that was provided to my superiors was less than superior. And so, when we go to briefings to say that you're going to be moving from here to here, I would know that I'm going in to support an infantry unit with artillery fire, but I didn't know where that would be going. I didn't know what the enemy buildup was, if any, because my unit could have gone in just to shoot artillery fires to serve as interdictions, and that just means that there's a presence. You might send a 3-point shooting guard in who's injured. That person's in there just to maybe take 2 people on defense on them to open up something else that may be available. Same with us. We would fire artillery to areas where we knew the American troops weren't, in hopes that that would discourage the enemy from coming towards wherever we were.
How would you describe the atmosphere?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, because first of all, we had very talented non-commissioned officers. You know the difference between officers and non-commissioned officers?
No.
Okay. An officer would be second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel or general. Non-commissioned officers would be your corporals, sergeants, sergeant first class, master sergeant, first sergeant, those types. So first of all, we had very talented and experienced sergeants working for us. I would have never made it in Vietnam if I had 6 lieutenants working together, but I had myself, I had some lieutenants out looking for the enemy called forward observers, and great sergeants. They kept the esprit de corps, camaraderie, up very, very high. We ate well, sometimes sea rations. My unit had its own mess hall, if you will, and so when we moved, it moved with us. So they always had fresh meals, hot eggs in the morning, pancakes, sausage, those types of things. So the morale was really high. They were well trained, we were well fortified. Probably the biggest thing was both the non-commissioned officers and I always had to really work on our subordinates to make sure that they dug in once we got to a location. And the reason for that is we had never been hit. Once you've been hit one time, digging in comes very quickly. Once you've been in a car accident, you become a little bit more cautious. You've been texting and you were in a car accident, you won't text anymore. Same thing there. And so, but it was good. The environment was good. We were always so close to the enemy, according to what we knew, that people weren't sitting around smoking marijuana or looking for booze. None of that. So we played volleyball in our unit area when we could, and so I thought it was good.
Okay.
We got mail every day. Every day. That was a big thing. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but to the GI in combat, mail's very important.
So the soldiers, you were treated pretty well while you were over there? Or
By my soldiers?
just like overall you were?
Well,
were the soldiers?
it was us.
Okay.
We were, I mean, everything around us was a Oriental, South Vietnamese, a Vietnamese person, and so, you know, we were together. We stuck together. So yes,
Good.
you know, I mean, obviously, being in charge of a unit, which I was, there were times that people didn't like exactly what I said, or you know, dig in. And it's hot. There are bugs all over the place, and so on. And, come on, sir. Nobody. We haven't been hit forever. Fill the sandbag. Dig in. You know. So those types of problems. But otherwise, it was fine.
What does dig in mean exactly?
Well,
Like-
you know what a foxhole is.
Mm,
Okay. Well, in Vietnam, when we first got there, then what we would do is we'd set up a perimeter. Sometimes it was U.S. infantry. Sometimes it was South Vietnamese troops would be around the outside of our unit. Okay, and that might be size of it might be 2 or 3 football fields put together. Okay, so then the infantry of some country, if not America's, was out here. Then I had 6 guns. They're called howitzers, so we'd be deployed like this.
mm-hmm. And
so what we had to do is we had to put up kind of a barrier around here so they would, it'd be protection in case machine gun fire or something was coming in. Just there would be a protection. They were made of sandbags
Okay.
to repel
Mm-hmm.
direct hits from rifles and machine guns and so on. And then in this area, a soldier would dig a 2-man foxhole, okay, and it would maybe be 6 feet deep, 5 feet, so they could stand in it and they could get down in it. Normally they slept on either cots or sleeping bags with their mosquito nets and so on. But if incoming fire came in, they would be able to get down in this location to protect themselves. So when you get to a location, and in the 1st Cav Division, we were moving every 2 or 3 days. Helicopters would come in. I'll show you a picture in a little bit. Helicopters would come in, pick up my whole unit, to include my mess hall and all that stuff, take us to all of our vehicles, our weapons, these artillery pieces and so on, fly us to a new location to sit in. So you had to cut out away some of the, you had to cut away some of the debris, and then it would be down at a point in time. Okay, guys, the weapons are all laid and they're pointed in the right direction. Dig in. So they have to go to this drill. So
Got it. Now tell me some of your experiences, something that sticks out to you during the war or that you'd like to share.
okay, probably there are 2 that stand out. Most importantly, would probably be the relief of Khe Sanh. That would be Khe Sanh, Khe Sanh. And what had happened is somehow, some way, the Marine Corps got put into Khe Sanh, which is, I don't even know how far. We'd have to look at a map, and I have one here if it's important. But many, 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 many miles from the coast. Mm-hmm. And they were there guarding an airstrip where planes would come in and provide supplies for the other troops that are around there. And the Marine Corps was developed to be an amphibious force where they would land on ships, or boats would bring them up, dump them off. They'd seize the beachhead, establish a headquarters, and then they would assault the enemy there. And for some reason, they weren't on the coast at all, but they were at Khe Sanh. And Khe Sanh was probably 10 kilometers, 6-7 miles away from the Laotian border. This would be more or less in the northwest portion of South Vietnam. And if you can imagine a cliff, a high cliff, 400 or 500 feet. The North Vietnamese artillery, they had built caves in the side of the cliff. what they would do, and put railroad tracks in this cave. What they would do is they bring this artillery out just to the edge of that cliff, shoot some rounds, and then move the artillery back away from that opening. So it was dug in well, okay? And so what they would do, come out there, and they were just firing all these rounds on the airstrip at Quezon, and here were all these Marines out there, and they were just taking artillery, and more artillery, and losing casualties, and replacing casualties. It was unbelievable. So my unit, the 1st Air Cav, in particular my battery, and the infantry, went into that area and relieved the Marines at Quezon. So they came in, they secured the area. We started firing interdictions and artillery fire at that mountain to keep them back in that cave, so other Air Force could come in and take the Marines the heck out of there where they didn't belong in the first place. Mm-hmm. And then we secured the area, and then got it to where this was not happening. And we found out that there was probably very little purpose for us to be there in the first place, except that it was a major avenue for these people coming into South Vietnam. So they maintained certain forces there, interdictory fires and so on. We got the Marines out of there. That was a big one. And then our unit was also involved in the Tet Offensive, mm-hmm. and January of '68, and that was very, very similar. We went in there, a lot of casualties, but I would like to say that in the time that I was when I was the battery commander of those 6 guns, we didn't lose anybody, except to the normal rotation of people, individual replacements I mentioned. Mm-hmm. After I left, and at this location in Quezon, some North Vietnamese soldiers came in and overran the artillery position because they just couldn't fire enough. And at that point in time, even though I was still in Vietnam, I was an advisor to an infantry battalion commander who would have maybe 500 troops. And we were up in this area, but some enemy came through this position and brought in satchel charges, which are high explosive. C4, do you know what that is? A lot of people use it for campfires to ignite a fire, okay, with explosives on it. It killed mm-hmm. some people, to include my driver. And going way ahead, when I went back on this Vietnam honor flight, I saw that Vietnam Wall, that Vietnam Memorial, and found his name on there. Took a picture of it, and I have that, which was very meaningful to me, even though he wasn't my driver at the time. He had been before. Mm-hmm. So, at any rate, what was your question again?
Just 2 of the most vivid experiences.
Yeah, well, then the casualties at the Tet Offensive were even greater. Okay, not so much for the artillery, but for the infantry. But we were there, and so those were the 2 big ones. Prior to that time, when I was a battery commander, it was pretty peaceful. I mean, we fired a lot of artillery. We had a lot of fire missions. And most of the time, when we got these fire missions, people would call in and they say suspected enemy fire or troops in the open, and so we would shoot artillery, and the lieutenants that were working for me, the forward observers, would adjust the artillery onto the enemy and give us some results and so on. But it was very low key compared to Quezon and Tet.
Okay. So how'd you deal with all the casualties that happened?
Well, you just would hear some numbers, mm-hmm. and you just try not to let it bother you. Yeah. And just hope that you continue to do what you had to do to make sure that other subordinates were not affected by that. As I said, when I was in the artillery battery, we had no casualties in my unit. And the other infantrymen would be people who lived in McCool Junction or Henderson I didn't know. Mm. You know, you see obituaries occasionally and say, that's too bad, but I don't know them. But you don't like to hear that any Americans were killed. We never got figures down at my level when I was with the first unit. With the second unit, probably the hardest thing for me to experience when I was there, when I was this liaison officer, providing the artillery advice to an infantry battalion commander, he would not let any American die if he could help it. And the medics were great. The medevac helicopters coming in were also great. But if there was somebody on the ground, wounded, he would take our helicopter down, even if there was a lot of fighting going around us, down on the ground, and have the medics or the other troops from the infantry put this individual on the aircraft. Then we would take him out, get him back to a safer haven. And the toughest thing for me, Emma, was to see a bleeding American alive. Every now and then you'd see a dead American, and you don't like to see that. But you knew at that point in time you couldn't do anything. But when you have a bleeding American right there, you know that there's somebody back in the United States that's wanting him to come home.
Mm-hmm.
You do anything. And I was scared the first few times we did that, but I got accustomed to it. I think we did it maybe 3 or 4 times.
So did you like keep getting your hopes up to come home, and when and why did you get to come home?
When and why?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, sure, I kept my hopes up. I think I wrote maybe 125 letters to my mom when I was there. I was single at the time, and so just keeping them up to speed, let them know I was okay. So sure, I was always happy to know that I was going to come home, and expected to come home, and my parents expected me to come home, and my dad bought me a '65 Camaro or '67 Camaro, whatever it was, and which he made me pay him back for, which I thought it was a gift when I came home, but at any rate, so they were expecting me to come home, and never had any doubts about it. Wanted to, but you know, I kept focused. I just wrote short letters all the time. My mom was really happy because she looked forward to that as much as I looked forward to her mail coming in our direction.
So how long were you in Vietnam?
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier in the discussion that we had individual replacements. Those were done every year unless somebody extended, and a lot of times there were good reasons for people to extend. First of all, the pay was really good. They had combat pay in addition to the normal pay, and for those who were pilots, they had flight pay added on to that, which was an added incentive to stay there. Also, they had savings plans there through a credit union where you could get any money you put in there, you get 10% interest. And at the time it was probably 3 or 4% interest, and today it's what, 1/8% or 1/2%. So it was very beneficial to, especially to those soldiers that might have had some debt. So all the money could go into this, they could get 10% interest and come back and take care of their debts. Very detrimental in many cases to families where they had kids, you know, because bad enough in many families for a father to be gone for a month, but a year or 2 years. So. But I did my 1 year, June of '67 to June of '68, and then came back.
So once you came back, did your life return to normal, or were things permanently changed?
First of all, when we came back, a lot of us were kind of on guard because in my particular case, our unit was our individual group that returned to Travis Air Force Base, which is by Oakland, California. And there had been a couple of disgruntled people that had showed up at the airport that actually killed soldiers that shot people who were getting off the aircraft. So we were guarded and told about this to make sure that the whole place was secure before we got off the plane. So they had actual troops from the Air Force that were kind of guarding that location. So once I got out of there, I had to kind of recall if it was a flight back to Southern California, but I went back to my home, and my family was happy to see me. I spent a couple weeks there before I had my next assignment. So, but yeah, did people treat me? Well, my family was excited to see me. My friends in Southern California were happy to see me back, and got very little flack from any of them.
So you didn't really experience the, like, being treated poorly once you came home?
No, and I think, a lot of people that have trouble, and this is just from what I've read and heard, were those people that probably didn't have a lot to do when they were in Vietnam. They got involved in drugs, and if they were ever exposed to the front lines, they may have served as a courier to take mail or supplies out to the field, and they hear a few shots and so on. But or those people who were in the infantry and they had a lot of their friends killed, and saw a lot of those people, like I mentioned, that were in front of me on that helicopter. But no, I don't think that I experienced anything unusual when I got back.
Have your views on the war changed over time at all?
Probably never still really understood what we accomplished. We bailed out of there, and again, I've only heard stories, and Leo Quaver's one who went back to Vietnam. I don't know if he ever told you that, but within the last 4 or 5 years, he and his wife went there to travel the country, and it's a beautiful country, South Vietnam, beautiful. Great place for somebody to take a honeymoon. Their beaches are beautiful, everything's really nice. But he went back there, and a lot of those things that the Americans had done, gone. We built all sorts of structures for them, gone. And the roads that the American engineers, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built, torn up. It'd be like not repairing the interstate for that many years. And next year in June will be 50 years since I went over there.
Oh, wow.
So you think if you don't take care of things for 50 years, you know what's going to happen to it. So, no, I have to weigh with a grain of salt the stories that I hear from some people about getting a lot of crap about Vietnam. If you're looking for laud and praise, that's not going to happen. Some of the units that, and even the 1st Cav Division, they have reunions and so on. But if you've gone over as a unit and come back as a unit, I can see that would be really fun. But I didn't know most of the people. I knew the guys that were right in my battery, and so I didn't chat a lot about Vietnam. I would people would want to have an interview, or if on the 29th of November, I'm going to go down with Jerry Volkmer, and we're going to talk about the Vietnam honor flight. And that will be all positive because the recognition is coming in now. Are you aware of that? Have you heard of the honor flights?
Just from you and
Okay.
Mr. Claver, yeah.
I'll tell you a little bit about it if you have room for it. But for the most part, my views, I'm still a little confused. It was chaotic, and I think the effects when you look at that Vietnam Wall in Washington D.C. and see nearly 60,000 people, and that doesn't include a lot of the people that are in hospitals right now with post-traumatic stress syndrome and those types of things. It's just, I think it was a devastating war.
What lesson did you learn that you'd want others to remember about this time in history?
Well, I think, if nothing else, just I'm very proud to be an American. I'm very proud of the soldiers that have been in Afghanistan and that are serving in that neck of the woods today. I'm proud every time I see another soldier. I'm proud of the Guard, the reserves, and that they want to do the type of thing that I wanted to do, to preserve the types of freedoms that you have and that my grandchildren have and my wife has. And so that's the lasting impression. Even though I didn't know exactly what was going on or exactly what we were doing, and didn't know if I really believed in all the statistics of the killed in action and missing in action. When you see the wall and you see what people who've been in the service before us have done, be it Korea, World War I, World War II, well, not before us now, but what you see what people in Afghanistan have done to preserve the freedoms for Americans, that's the lasting impression I have.
So, what kind of things have you been involved in now with being a Vietnam War vet, or if you want to talk about the honor flight now?
Well, I'm involved in very little. I mean, I indirectly support the Bolton Post 19 York American Legion by serving as a chairman or committee member of Legion Baseball. So that's my contribution to that organization. I am off and on about going to slum feeds and Veterans Day recognitions. I've been asked several times to be a keynote speaker on Veterans Day. I did that a couple times, but I haven't done it in the last 20 years. Nor have I been asked recently either. But the amazing thing, Emma, is what Bill and Bill Williams and his wife, I forget her first name, I think it's Joe, have done for the veterans of Korea, World War II, and most recently Vietnam. They had the honor flight that I went on D-Day last year, along with, I think there were 9 or 10 of us from York County. Jerry Volkmer, I mentioned. Leo Claver was on the flight. There were 7 or 8 others. Jack Verbka, his son, Chad Verbka, played Legion Baseball about the time my son was involved in it. Anyway, there were those of us that went. It was absolutely wonderful. And if you want to, either for the record or without the record, I can give you a short
Yeah, I want to hear about it.
on what that was all about. But in your question that I got off the subject on, my involvement. Otherwise, I have not been involved. I just, as I get a little bit older and I see some of the World War II veterans and Koreans leaving, I decided that fairly soon, maybe in a couple of weeks, I'm going to go back to, they just started coffees on Tuesday and Thursday in the VFW buildings. The chances are, I think I'd like to bring something to that group and hope some other younger veterans would come out there and join that group just to keep that organization going. But other than that, not too much. I don't go to reunions. They just had a Vietnam, they just had an honor flight reunion for those of anybody who have been to any of the honor flights that the Williams family put together. That didn't appeal to me. There are some guys that go to all that stuff, and I'd rather announce a girls' basketball game at York High School. Or volleyball, or softball, or football. You know, so, anyway.
Okay.
But one thing that I think it all ties together. My wife and I are pretty active as volunteers in the community. She's going to start her 21st year on the school board. I've been involved in those things that I've said. I'm involved in teammates and I'm involved in other things. And those are things I couldn't do when I was in the service because our orientation was right towards our troops or whatever. And so this has been a good opportunity to give back. And so I volunteer in that way rather than volunteer to help the Veteran of Foreign Wars or the American Legion unit.
So I think if you
We
talk
have 2 of
about
them.
the
The other
honor
one
flight.
fell apart. That was handed to Jean and me when we returned from Washington, D.C. she didn't go on the trip, but she met me in the airport, and they bussed all the wives, so on, over to Eppley Airfield. And so when we were going through, what was absolutely amazing, there were 5,000 people that lined up that same day. And we met on the 5th of June, had a banquet that day, then flew out, got up at 2 in the morning, departed from Eppley at 4, landed at Ronald Reagan in D.C. Probably about 7:15 in the morning. Spent a full day there, transported back, and landed at Eppley that night. And then we had to all wait till all 3 flights had come in. There was a red flight, white flight, and a blue flight. Interesting, huh? Red, white, blue. And till everybody had gotten back. And then we paraded out through the terminal, and I bet there were 6 to 8 people thick all the way through.
Wow.
And when you're going through, everybody's doing this stuff, and thanks for your service, and handing these. I mentioned Jerry Volko. He and I are talking on the 29th to the Sunrise Otoma, and that's a picture of him. I don't know if you know him. He and his wife, probably before you were born, owned a place called King's Court, which is down. You know where the trading post is? Across from Mid-America Vision.
Okay.
And Henderson State Bank,
yeah.
right on the corner. He and his wife had a really nice clothing store for women, but like everything else, when Walmart and some of the others started coming to town. Here's a picture of that wall
Wow.
that had the 59,000 names on it. It was probably quarter mile. Here's another picture of some of the guys. I felt very fortunate on this trip that I wasn't one of these guys in a wheelchair. It was really well organized, but there were probably, on our flight, we had some of the people that had the greatest health issues on our flight because they wanted to make sure that they had a great nursing crew with us. So they had like 3 or 4 doctors on the flight, maybe 4 nurses. We put them all on one flight because if they had health episodes and so on, they didn't have to return 3 different flights.
Yeah.
They just returned one. But that wall just continues to go. Have you seen it? Sunday afternoon, about 2 o'clock, and we went in and registered, and we got our shirts. It said Vietnam Honor Flight. Then we kind of shot the breeze. They had all sorts of displays, pictures, and pictures of people who were killed in Vietnam, Gold Star families. That'd be the families of the people that lost soldiers in Vietnam. They also had a booth set up where I could go. I told you I lost my driver who was killed in Vietnam, so I could go up there to this one place and say, my driver's name was Eddie Schiavone. And what he could do is go and find out exactly where his name was on that wall. So when I got there, I knew it was on panel E9, 5 lines down, so I could spot that name rather than going for over a quarter of a mile. Oops. So we did that, and then they had a banquet. God, the banquet was absolutely superb, and there were 1,800 people that were at the banquet, and there were 504 of us veterans that were there. So the rest of the people were support people, were wives, and that type of thing. And so they had this thing, but also posting of the colors, Pledge of Allegiance, and Yvonne was her name, not Joe. But they were the ones that sponsored this one and all the others that they've had. It was absolutely superb. Coordination, unbelievable, as you can imagine, for 500 people. We had this banquet. We really felt good about ourselves. At one point in time, Emma, they said, okay, this lady came up. She said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here. Something that can either be dispersed by canister, but most often it was dispersed by the Air Force, and it sprays on trees. So if you sprayed it over here in East Hill Park on the 20th of May, in the afternoon, you come out in the morning, every leaf is gone. So what reconnaissance people could do is they could look down and see foxholes, and they could see ammunition, and they could see enemy targets and so on. But little did they know at the time that the people in those aircraft that were dispersing, or the people on the ground, or the infantry that would walk through these areas, would also be exposed to Agent Orange. So they were finding that a lot of them had deformities, some of them got into their lungs and so on, and they would die later, maybe not right away, several years later. This gal that came up, let's see, Susan Littlefield came up there and talked about having lost her father to Agent Orange. She had effects of it, of Agent Orange, and so I don't know if she was born at the time. And her son has deformities because of it, and they suspect it's from Agent Orange, but because they can think of nothing else. The doctors and medical people have not been able to find anything else. So anyway, she said at this banquet, she got up there, would anybody who is here, who's been affected by Agent Orange, stand up? Okay? And I thought maybe 3 or 4 people stand up. And out of that 500 people, I bet 120 of them stood up.
Oh, wow.
You know, so you went back and you asked before if I had any effects. I'm just damn pleased that I came home with all my limbs, my fingers. Maybe I'm a little off, but no Agent Orange. My kids have had no deformities. My grandchildren have had none. So I feel very blessed in that regard. Okay, so this went on. It was really nice. We finished up maybe 8:30 or 9, and I'm trying to think. Governor Heinemann was there. Had a wonderful orchestra was up there playing music of our time frame and so on. Then at the end, this Pipes and Bugle Corps did Amazing Grace. You know, they're really neat in the first place. Drum and Bugle Corps that did that, and then they had some violinists up there, all from one family. Young kids also played Amazing Grace, so that was great. Okay, went back, went to our rooms. I was so nervous about oversleeping. I set my alarm for 1 o'clock. We had to be down in the lobby at 2, and they lined us up like cattle, you know, and made sure that we were all there. And we were given, you know, if your name starts with such as, or if your number is, how'd that go? I was on the red flight. I was in the 4th bus. My number was 216. So with numbers, with the red flight, numbers 1 through 65 line up here, etc. Okay, so I was towards the end with my name being John Vincent. So then probably at about 3, we had everybody herded onto the buses, and the different buses took off, the red being first once again. Went out there, and have you heard of Senator Ben Sass from Nebraska?
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah.
He was out there in the morning shaking every one of our hands before we got on the bus. We got on the bus, and there was a sack lunch, or a sack breakfast for us, and we'd already had coffee and rolls and those types of things down in the lobby. Got on the buses, drove with police escort to Epley Airfield into the gate, got off, boarded the aircraft 1 to 65, 66 to whatever the heck, and very, very orderly. We didn't have to go through security, didn't have to do anything. I just had to show my driver's license and to get on the plane, and got in there, had flight crews that were absolutely wonderful. Thank you for your service, and you know, the whole crew's clapping. They were red, white, and blue. The plane was adorned. It was wonderful. Okay, flew to Washington D.C. Got there, as I said, about 7:30. Also, police escort, and they took us up there. And there were 2 police vehicles ahead of the buses, and one vehicle went up there and stopped the traffic, and the other one led the throng onto the Lincoln Memorial. But I kept thinking, I wonder what the heck those people are thinking. The vehicles that got stopped by that one. Rush hour traffic, 7:30 in the morning. They're trying to get to work, and here come all these buses parading by. And so off we went to the Lincoln Memorial, then had a great day going to various places. They had a special celebration at the Vietnam Wall that day. I went to Iwo Jima, saw all sorts of neat memorials, and it was at breakneck pace, to do all of this stuff in one day. And let's see if this, see how I said I was on the red plane. Then what happened? We arrived Reagan 7:30 a.m. as I thought. 8:45 photo on the steps of Lincoln Memorial, and then we went to the ceremony at Vietnam Wall, and then Arlington National Cemetery, and all this stuff, and then all the way to arrive Omaha that same day.
Wow.
And so then it went to waiting for the red, the white, the blue flights to get in there before we did that parade through there. So, but then we got certificates and welcome home, Big Brother pins, and so this is something that because we went as individual replacements, and as we came home as individual replacements, there was no fanfare. Not that I expected there to be any, but all these years, so many people and different things happened on campuses. When I didn't mention this, but after I came back from Vietnam, I went to more training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. My next assignment was at Nebraska in Lincoln, and that was rather peaceful. Although they did ignite our Army van, they lit it on fire. Some protesters that came in the basement, and so we had a lot of smoke damage in the M&N building, which is right next to the old Coliseum. But other than that, I never had people spit on me, warmonger, or none of that stuff. They were pretty respectful. Madison, Wisconsin, though, they blew up buildings and raised all sorts of heck, and they wanted ROTC off campus.
Wow.
They didn't make it happen. But so, anyway, so when you have something like this, even though it's 49 years later, I think it makes all of us feel great. And people are recognizing that there are folks out there that don't know much about Vietnam and don't know much about what people did to contribute to their country until you look at that darn wall. And so I think that's why, surprise, they have the honor flight. It was not so much what happened when we got in Omaha. I mean, I had no idea it'd be 5,000 people. But when we got to Washington, D.C. at 7:30 that morning, I got off the plane. And bear in mind that these are all Nebraska Vietnam vets. We got off the plane, and there must have been 400, 500, 600 people in the terminal, and as we came through, they were clapping like that. And when you go by each one of the different flights that were departing, they would come out to that hall and clap and so on. I had chills. I had no idea what was going to happen there. I'd heard that maybe they've been on radio. They've been asking people to come to the airport to greet us when we got back, and I thought maybe there'd be 800 to 1,000 there, but they estimated 5,000.
Wow.
So,
Cool.
so anyway, it was quite an experience.